The blue-white breakdown is underway again. We don't know where he is. He's drinking Coors Light someplace, God knows. But he deserves a vacation once in a while. And so we got some heavy hitters the last week we had Brett McMurphy. This week, Mr. Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports. And what a week to have him. I mean, in so many ways. This has been a hell of a couple of weeks for expansion. But before we get to that, could you believe? And you play some golf, right? Do you play?
Yeah. I'm not good. I play, but I'm one of those guys who likes to watch it and
Yeah.
listen to play-by-play on the radio. So yeah,
Wait a minute. You listen to radio play-by-play golf?
I on the majors. Yeah,
Who
I'm
does
that
that?
guy.
Is that Jack Buck still? Is that
No,
Jack Buck and Hank Stram? No?
no, it's not.
That's the last time I remember anything on the radio. Weren't they great on Monday Night Football? They were the
Oh,
best, man.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And Stram would always predict the plays before they
Yeah.
happened.
Looks
And
like something right here, Jack.
yeah. Do that again. Do that again.
Looks like something right here, Jack.
I'm
And it
gonna
would
slot
be.
it.
It'd be a toss sweep. He knew
And
it.
then he'd get it, and then Buck would say, "You got it again, partner."
That's right.
You are
It
a
was
Cardinals
great.
fan, right? Not a
I
Royals
grew
fan?
up in St. Louis. I know all
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, are you a Cardinals fan?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
All right.
not lately, but that's another story.
Well, oh, you're a front runner, are you? I see.
Well,
Okay.
I
That's not
don't.
the way it works,
My
Dennis.
summer is open. Let me put it that way. In
Oh,
terms of
please. Hey, you got to hang with them when they suck. And right now, I can't remember the Cardinals sucking like this. It's been a
no, they
long
got to
time.
hang with me. But right now
Oh,
they've done
wow.
everything wrong. But anyway,
All right. The Live PGA merger, did that shock you, stun you, and what do you think the ramifications are down the road?
yeah, it shocked me. I think it's the biggest sports story of the year to
Hmm.
date, and just be the moral implications, the ethical implications. And if I was to write a column, and I'm not because I don't cover golf, but I thought about it for a day, it would come down to this: the Saudis own pro golf. Okay,
Yeah,
whatever
they
that
do.
means going forward. These guys, when they want something, they do things to extreme. They pay 200 million for Phil. They paid 400 million for some of these European soccer stars to get in there. They own Newcastle soccer team. When Khashoggi's voice became too loud, they allegedly murdered him. What's the next step? Mike Tirico kind of casually said on NBC yesterday, "What if the Saudis decide to have an NIL arm in college golf?" I think it goes way much bigger than that.
Hmm.
Potentially, I'm not saying the Saudis would get involved in college athletics. I think what it opens up to think about is corporate involvement beyond sponsorship.
And
That
decisions
would
being made behind the scenes by some really unsavory characters. I mean, you think pro sports has been bad before? Just
oh
wait a while.
yeah. No, I think it opens the door. And again, this is just a concept. I'm not talking about the Saudis, corporate involvement in college sports because they spend every dime they put out. Okay, what's to keep somebody of means from, say, making the Big Ten a line item in a hedge fund? Again, I'm talking way, way off into outer space. But when that happened yesterday, that's the first thing I thought of because I think it's headed that way. Somebody's going to have to pay those players, and maybe that TV revenue isn't enough because I'm way past discussing Congress or anything else. I think you and I agree that we're headed towards this model. So, we'll see.
Well, reeling back into golf, Mohammed bin Salman is
Yeah.
is just a murderous monarch. I mean, I don't
Right.
even know. He's a prince. He's the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia. Our intelligence organizations are pretty certain that he executed and hacked into pieces with a bone saw a Washington Post reporter
Yep.
for dissent. This is the kind of guy he is. We know about Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11. These people now they're in charge of the endorsement capabilities of the PGA Tour. That's part of his bailiwick now. I mean,
Yeah.
that's crazy to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And they better get used to it. I don't think the discussion is about how to penalize Phil and Brooks and all these other guys. Are we going to wake up someday and the 14-year-old son of the prince is a pretty good golfer and he gets a sponsor's exemption to the Masters or something, and all of a sudden it's just a joke.
Well,
Because that's the way these people operate. Like I said up front, they do things to extremes. And sports washing, yes, it's sports washing. They're trying to get their way in, not only to sports, but to become, ethical washing. I don't know, to become corporate citizens, which,
I,
I have a hard time believing right now.
they are willing to buy their way in with
Yeah.
force into anything, and there is the implicit threat of violence.
Yeah.
That's what they've done.
Yeah.
Um, I've been I have been retro watching um, Ozark because I hadn't seen it before, and our son is showing it to us, and I'm like right in the middle of it. It reminds me of Marty Bird going to work for the Navarro cartel. I mean,
Yeah.
that is essentially who's running the PGA now, and people don't seem to grasp this. These
Yeah.
are nasty, nasty people.
And I get the feeling watching the coverage yesterday that the Saudis knew how this was going to play out before Liv was even formed. In other words, this might have been the play. We'll get in court.
The long play. Yeah.
They don't want to get the discovery. Neither do we, and we've got the leverage because we can buy them. So however long that was going to last, and you can figure out everything else. But you're right. I mean, this is one of their biggest plays. Obviously, European soccer, English soccer is big, getting all those players. But they own global golf. And someone just mentioned something on the radio what are they going to do with the LPGA? Don't they deserve some of this? And considering their human rights, record with women, how is that going to work? Because
It's
sooner
the
or later
most
they're going to speak out. And
it's
it's
the
not going to sit
single
well.
it's the single most repressive regime to
Yeah.
women on the planet.
Yeah.
Um, and it's almost like Jay Monahan did this deal on his own undercover,
Yeah.
which suggests to me one of two things, and I'm probably going way off base here, but this is speculation, and he's opened himself up to speculation, so be it. A, he got a little frightened at these people,
Yeah.
and they made him an offer he felt he couldn't refuse. Or B, he was in bed with them from the get-go, and
Yeah.
this was a long play for both of them, and that he agreed to this, and he was almost play acting.
Yeah.
I don't know which, but both of those are possible.
Yeah. It's a heck of a play act to sit there on national television
Yeah.
and say, you're never, when was the last time you were ashamed to be a member of the PGA? I mean, if he was play acting, that was a heck of a deal.
Yeah, well, now, and we'll see where that goes. But you're pretty much an expert on the Big 12, and there's a lot popping there too. You grew up in St. Louis, but you've always lived in Kansas City since then, right?
Yeah, since '81. Yep.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah.
So you're right in the middle of Big 12, Big 8 country. And what are we? The hang up, as I understand it, is that the Pac-12 still hasn't announced a media rights deal worth because the Big 12 needs to know what they're going to deal with before they start making offers to Pac-12 teams. Yeah. What are we looking at? Is there rumors that there's going to be an announcement on Friday now for the Pac-12?
Yeah, I don't think so.
No. Okay.
Yeah, we've been listen, Dave. We've been hearing this since last August.
I know.
Remember they had the exclusive negotiating window, and I've written all this. Then it was January 1st. Then since January 1st, it's been like 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks. It's like putting off rent you owe. And yeah, no, I mean today, there's an executive session of the Colorado trustees, and we're recording this on Wednesday, where they're going to discuss expansion. But I wouldn't expect anything to come about because, look, the Big 12 right now, in my opinion, at this stage, it really has to watch itself legally. You could be walking into torturous interference if you talk too much to these conferences. Now, I think that what keeps it from being filed or alleged right now is the Pac-12 isn't united to begin with. They owe Comcast
Explain that. Is that a corporate version of tampering? What is that?
Yeah, torturous interference is we've got a contract with these schools, and you're talking to them. Think of college football coaches talking about tampering with their players and recruits. I mean, just think
Yeah.
of it that way. It came about in like 2010 in this latest round of realignment when the Pac-12 was trying to get 6 of the Big 12 teams, and that was alleged. So I think number one, I think they have to wait out. I know they have to wait out whatever the Pac-12 does or doesn't. Up against that, it's an artificial deadline of June 30th, where San Diego State's buyout, potential expansion candidate for the Pac-12 and Big 12, goes from like, I think 19 million to 34 or 38 million. And their AD has already been quoted as saying, we can't afford that. So that's kind of an artificial deadline. I'd look for something, again, who knows for sure, for something to happen by the end of the month.
And
Yeah.
just to make sure people understand, I think we both believe this, that the Pac-12 has taken so long to try to negotiate a deal. And as I recall it, I don't cover this nearly as intensely as you do with these other leagues as I would the Big Ten, but the Pac-12 cannot negotiate a major network deal, right? ESPN is out. Is that
Right.
the way I remember it?
Yeah.
The other networks look to be out, and now we're talking about all streaming, maybe. Is that right?
Yeah. I'll summarize the general, feeling in the industry that unless George Kliavkoff, the commissioner of the Pac-12, has something no one's ever heard of in terms of a deal up his sleeve, then they've got nothing. They don't have a major linear carrier, which, I'm talking about Fox,
Major
ESPN,
network.
the broadcast, and they don't have less than 50% on streaming. And if they don't have that, then do schools run for the hills because it's a recruiting thing, because it's a visibility thing. We can talk about streaming, but it hasn't hit yet. It will in the future, but it hasn't hit yet. And after all that, you've got to convince these schools to sign a grant of rights where we know for sure that Colorado has options, Arizona has options, Oregon has options, and Washington has options. So do they even get to that point, or do schools start just breaking off? I don't know.
It certainly looks like it to me that it's inevitable that the Pac-12 is crumbling. If you cannot construct a media rights deal, that means your value is in the toilet. It just isn't good enough, and the strongest, most valuable pieces will break off. That's economic physics. It's not hard to figure out. So, well, what do you think is the first domino that falls? We've got a new Big Ten commissioner now, and Tony Petitti, a very, very savvy television guy who's only been a television guy. He really has no background in collegiate athletics at all. He's kind of a different animal that way for the Big Ten. I would say Washington and Oregon are the two prime pieces maybe for the Big Ten, and maybe Stanford. But the Big 12 is clearly interested in Colorado, Arizona, Utah, and now Connecticut, and maybe even Gonzaga for basketball only. Is that the way you see it?
Yeah. I think the play is to get I don't know, since I wrote that story this week, I don't know if Gonzaga is in it as much as UConn, because UConn would be a full member. We can make UConn football jokes all we want, but they would be a full member.
And we do.
And we do. But
hey, they finally got a coach.
Yeah.
They do have a real coach. Mora is a very good coach.
Oh, he's a very good coach. Went to a bowl game. I mean, just pitiful program. But, we've seen, at least historically, they can be competitive. They went to the Fiesta Bowl that one year. That's not going to happen, ever again, probably. But, they do become a full member, and that allows Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner, then at the very least, I think his play is to add a Colorado, and then convince his presidents to bring in UConn, because I'm told UConn has been very receptive. Now,
I'm sure they have
in all of this. Yeah. We can talk about the travel for 30 minutes, but And then maybe hope that the dominoes fall in the Pac-12. Then you can get to 16, and at least you're equal in number with the Big Ten and SEC. And I think it was in my story this week, like the nut graph. I said maybe this is just all about security, getting your nose under the tent, financial security, and getting as many brands as you can in one place, which is what the SEC and Big Ten have done. So when there is some sort of economic or real breakaway, you're in the club.
Brett last week said he believes the Big Ten will move. I don't want to misspeak, but I believe he said the Big Ten, he believed would move sooner than people think, certainly within the next 4 years. And if dominoes start falling, though, man, it doesn't have to be immediate. I mean, someone's going to have to. The way I see it, it's going to be Colorado, Connecticut, and then if any pieces leave the Pac-12, it's going to be the Titanic. I mean, and then we're talking about, does the Big Ten move on Washington and Oregon and maybe Stanford? Correct? Is that how you see it?
Yeah. And I think Brett has it right. I quoted a consultant named Patrick Crakes this summer. He spent 7 years as a Fox Sports VP, very powerful guy at one time, now does big time deals. He said to me in the middle of this, forget expansion in the Big Ten, forget it. It's not going to happen. Now in 2 years, which is what we just said, once Tony Petitti gets his feet on the ground, and I'm told, we've already seen reported that Kevin Warren left that place in a mess. So there's a lot to be done.
Oh boy.
There's nothing compelling the Big Ten to go get Oregon and Washington right now. They're still going to be there. They have no other suitors. The Big 12's not interested.
Yeah, it's not like the SEC is going to come and get them.
Right. So
they're going to be, the longer it goes on, the more desperate they will be. Their price will go down. They won't get a equal piece of the pie for God knows how many years.
They won't in 2 years. They won't in 4 years. I've said they'd go to the Big Ten right now for $100 more than they're getting in the Pac-12. I mean, I really believe that, because that's a lifetime decision. You are set for the history of your school if you go to the Big Ten. Think about what all that means. So no, I think here's how I think it's going to happen with those two. I think it's going to kind of fall to the Big Ten presidents. In 2 years, they're going to look at this travel with USC and UCLA, and there are going to be stories and there's going to be problems.
Yes.
And they go, you know what? The travel partner thing doesn't look that bad. I hate to get in the AAU thing because I think it's worthless. I think that discussion is worthless, but I think one or both are AAU. It really doesn't matter.
Both are.
And you grandfather them in at half a share, which by then might be 38, 40 million. That's a lot more than
we're talking about 70 million a year.
Yeah.
Minimum for Big Ten schools as this deal keeps progressing. The one that just went into effect for the Big Ten. So that's right now twice as much as the Pac-12 has been making. I believe the Big 12 announced 44. Isn't that what Yormark said per?
Yeah, 44. So that's 44 million per school, all in their latest 2023 fiscal year, which is significant. That number.
Pretty good. It's better than the ACC. It's better than the Pac-12.
Yep.
They're positioning themselves to be the survivor conference. While we don't know what can happen to either the ACC or the Pac-12, because they have significant, attractive schools in both of those leagues that offer a term that you taught me, pro rata value, meaning at least at the median of whatever your per school payout is, they would not diminish it any, if that is pro rata value. Now, Washington and Oregon, from a revenue standpoint, seem to me, based on the equity and athletics figures, other figures, they seem to be right at the median of the Big Ten, right at the median figure in gross revenue. To me, they would be a great place simply because the USC and UCLA being on their own, those athletes, every time they get on a plane for a road game, going to Lafayette, and I don't care if it's a charter flight or not, Lafayette and Bloomington, Piscataway, 4, 5, 6 hour flights every time they get on a plane for a conference game. Are you kidding? That's going to get back to recruits and their own players are going to say, man, you don't want to come here. This is brutal. This is miserable, unless they get some travel partners out there. And I believe Washington and Oregon
Yeah.
and somebody else will. I think Stanford will be the fifth Pacific school. And you know what? I think if Delaney was still around, he would be a little more of a visionary in this thing and connect the entire northern tier of the country.
Yeah.
I
He's
think
around. He's around. He's
I know
consulting.
he talks,
Yeah.
but and I believe Petiti would listen to him where I'm not sure Warren did. And I heard the same
No,
things about.
I can
I'm
tell you that.
I heard the same things about Warren's tenure that you did. That it was just a disaster. So I don't discard out of hand that at some point, when all the dominoes are falling and we have two super conferences and then whatever's left over is in the Big 12. If you were the Big 10 presidents, and I know right now they don't offer pro rata value, but to me, Utah and Colorado are of interest simply because they're both very major markets. They're not developed right now. Utah probably is developed, but it's a really growing area. Colorado has forgotten. The people in Denver have forgotten about Boulder because it's become such a pro town. But we both remember when Colorado football was a force 30 years ago. It's just fallen off, and it's like a garden that hasn't been tended correctly. If they were in the Big Ten, could you see Colorado being a part of this as a spec piece for the Big Ten down the line, even if they were back in the Big 12? Is that even possible? Just to
I
connect
don't
the whole
know.
country.
That's going down a rabbit hole I haven't considered, but yeah, I mean the again, the academic profile fits.
Yep.
Utah almost seems like a Big Ten
They
school to
do.
me, the way they play and their climate
Yeah.
and everything. But yeah, I mean, I could see that. Look, you never say never. I've said this for years doing the realignment beat. Like, whatever you write can't be wrong because tomorrow it could be right. It's just
Eventually.
you could never write a correction in these. It's like, that could happen. Yeah, sure.
I'll give you an example. Steve Politi dug up a column I wrote in 1992, mind you, about how Rutgers was a perfect member for the Big Ten.
See?
And it said, see, you're the first. You were the visionary. And that still hasn't really worked out for the Big Ten. I guess I'm to blame. I don't know. But Delaney believed it. Delaney believed that. See, that was a spec bet for him. And it still hasn't really panned out. But that's because Rutgers football has never re-achieved the heights they did in the mid-aughts. But we saw what they did there in 06. That was crazy.
Yeah, that's what Connecticut would be for the Big Ten. It's a growth stock. That's the way it was put to me.
For a Big 12, you mean?
Yeah, for Big 12, and you pay them whatever. I think the average Big East payout is $3.8 million now in a basketball-only conference. I have no idea what they get as an independent football. It's got to be peanuts. So you give them a share, and maybe watch them grow, because his biggest play in all this is to have two separate deals: basketball, football, two media rights deals, and they get more in aggregate as a conference than they would if they had one deal with both sports.
Now, I saw that you wrote that. Do you think any network would ever do that? That they would ever negotiate separate contracts for football and basketball?
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. I mean, this guy has so many ideas that they are completely in love with him in the Big 12.
You're talking about Brett Yormark, the commission. Yeah.
Yeah. All of it may not happen, obviously. He wants to go to Rucker Park next summer and play a series of exhibition games. Well, think about this. If you had, I wrote this too, like if you got Gonzaga and UConn, you'd have the last four national champions: Kansas, Baylor, UConn, the last three, and then Gonzaga, which has been to 25 straight tournaments and two Final Fours since 17. And you put that in the middle of Rucker Park. Yeah, just messing around. Doesn't count. Exhibition game. That'd be appointment viewing on ESPN, because they'd lap that up in a minute. In the middle of summer, you see what they're showing now.
That's what you need as a commissioner. You don't simply need a bean counter. Well, there's lots of those people on staff. You need a promoter. Yeah. You need a visionary and a promoter. and a guy that thinks of big ideas that don't necessarily cost that much.
Mm-hmm.
And the bad commissioners are not thinking of ideas; they're reacting and then making decisions that cost money, like Kevin Warren did with giving the title game to NBC out of line, which should never have
Well,
happened. Now it's
let
going to
me
cost
ask you
them
something. You can
$5 million.
answer this. David, let me ask you this. I saw that story. I saw the consternation and hand wringing. Those presidents signed that contract. They
Yeah, they
looked at
look.
that and knew that. The ADs knew that, right? And
Mhm.
if they didn't, this isn't a Kevin Warren story. This is uh, this is bad vetting.
Well,
I,
but
Go ahead.
look, he doesn't communicate, and that was his main problem. He
Right.
kind of liked sitting in the throne or something, and he didn't communicate to anybody. I mean, I still it's like he was incapable of it.
Yeah.
So that would be a pretty interesting bullet point you would want to explain to people in the
Exactly.
contract. Say, look, this is what I'm thinking. What do you guys think of that? I mean, how can it happen? How can it happen? I
Yeah.
still remember Dave Revson on the Big Ten Network interviewing him about the return to football in 2020 when he reneged on his initial decision.
Yes.
And he kept, the one thing you would want to explain to people is why now? Okay, why? You just canceled the season 2 weeks ago. Why are we going back? What changed? You would have to think up a line of bullshit for that, wouldn't you, at least?
Yes.
Wouldn't you? And Dave kept giving them the opportunity to spew whatever he was going to
Yeah.
say.
We
And
reconsidered. Yeah.
he just didn't even answer the question. It was like he was incapable of communicating it. You can't have a guy like that who's so, whatever the opposite of the antonym of nimble is, on
Right.
his feet. You got to have a guy who's a little full of crap and a promoter. And I guess
Well,
that's what Brett Yormark is, right?
and let's be clear, there's a reason he doesn't have his job in the Big Ten anymore. Yes, he left to go to the Bears, but he was not going to be renewed in September of 2024 when he started poking around at that prospect. He was told, And I think there was a job at the Broncos. He got the job at the Bears. And look, that may be his niche. He was at the Vikings when they built a new stadium. And so maybe that's great for them, but he was never going to be the commissioner going forward because he kept pushing this narrative about Oregon and Washington and Cal and Stanford at a time when the presidents were just sick of it and said, let's see how 16 works. Because nobody really knows. The SEC doesn't know. The Big Ten doesn't. Never been tried before except in the WAC in 1999. I think it lasted 1 or 2 years and it imploded on itself. So let's just see how that works first. But he never let go. He kept pushing, and they couldn't stand it.
Well, there's also the point that you want to let this play out so you can get them for a great value, and it will happen. Like we said,
Yeah.
who's going to pounce on Washington, Oregon, and Stanford? They're not going to, even if they did go to the Big 12, which they're not. You could pick them off after that at a low price. So I do understand the president's feelings, and they do want to test drive this for a little while. And I do think that's an eventuality because you do have to get USC and UCLA some travel partners, but you don't have to do it now. You don't have to do it next year. You can wait. So he wasn't listening to his own people. Your viewpoint on where this is all headed, and it's so hard to predict simply because of what we talked about, that the parameters today will not necessarily be the parameters even next week. And I'm asking you to predict a couple 4 years in the future. What's the most likely scenario for how the conferences are aligned? Because I do have an opinion about that, and I've written it. I think you have too, even though we don't know.
Yeah, big picture. The Power Five is dead, and it's dead right now. It's a Power Two.
To me, it died when UCLA and USC went to the Big Ten. That was it.
They've got the biggest, best brands among those 32 teams, period. Now, what does that look like? And I call it the big flex. When they decide either one or the other or both, when they want something, what does that look like? Do they take the tack that, 95 scholarships, we can afford it, we're going to do that. And the NCAA says, well, not as an NCAA member, we can have our own playoff. Great. Greg Sankey reiterated that last week at their spring meetings. In one sense, he said, I think in 26 when the playoff expands, I think it's going to be 6 and 6, 6 automatic qualifiers, 6 at large. But we can have our own playoff. He said that in the same sentence. He keeps hammering that home like that is the huge stick that he could use. So I think it's the big two, the power two, what that's going to look like. I think Greg Sankey provided a hint at the very end last Friday of his remarks in Destin. He said, you know what bothers me? That the Board of Governors has this membership where Division I has to be represented, because they do have this rule in the NCAA. You have to have equal representation in each committee. And the Board of Governors runs the NCAA for those.
From all the divisions, you mean?
For all the divisions.
Yeah,
which
is crazy.
NCAA.
Because
what
it's
he
like,
said
it's like having minor league baseball at the
Yes.
table in the major leagues. It makes no
what
sense.
he basically
Or arena
suggested-
leagues in the NFL. It doesn't make any sense.
What he basically suggested is there has to be a realization that there has to be a separate body that governs whatever this is. And then I think that's the next step. I think that's the next step when they get in the room and decide how to what the share is going to be for the expanded playoff, because there's never been that much money in the system before. And then everybody's going to go, whoa, wait a minute. That's a de facto breakaway. And they're still going to play Akron. They're still going to play Toledo. But it's going to be the latest evolution of what happened in 1978 when Division I and Division I AA was formed. Now FCS and FBS in 2015. The Autonomy 5. Sorry, Mike Oresco. That was NCAA legislation. They are the Autonomy 5. They were given weighted voting rights, and that's what this is going to be. And then after that, I don't know what it looks like. It's what they want to do with it.
How do you feel about the prospects of the SEC and the Big Ten finally getting together and saying, look, we can get maximum value from one big contract with the networks. Let's merge just like the AFL and NFL did, and make this a lot easier on us. We're looking at athletes as employees. That is right down the pipe. It's going to happen. It's clear it's going to happen now with the latest Pac-12 announcement. Why not create a structure where we can have collective bargaining, have a players union, and put a lid on NIL, put a lid on everything? Because if you have players represented, and I don't know who would represent them, Rich Paul, who would get into that? Who would be the college players representative? What kind of money would be in it for
Marvin Miller? There is no Marvin Miller out there.
That's somebody like that. I think it would be somebody like Rich Paul, a current agent. But anyway, you have the players. As long as the players are represented and they have a CBU, a collective bargaining unit, and they agree to a contract, you can put a lid on all these costs.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you can budget. But that can't happen unless the SEC and the Big Ten get together and agree on a structure, maybe some sort of grand czar. Do you think that's possible in the foreseeable future?
In one sense, I don't see Greg Sankey taking orders from anybody, but I think something like that will happen when the NCAA runs out all these ground balls in Congress, waits for all the trials to run through, because all they have to do is lose one of them or settle or something, because they're not going to oversee collective bargaining. They're just not.
No, they're going to have nothing to do with
that.
Yeah.
And then the NLRB thing, which is the hearing in November, which may declare players employees.
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of forgotten about that. That will, if that doesn't go the Pac-12 and NCAA's way, then they will appeal that to the highest court.
And Brett Kavanaugh already said they were employees. I mean, he said it a year ago. So there's your highest court.
So they run out all those ground balls, then one or both with all this money. Why not? Hey, we're going to something, I say simple, like we're going to collective bargaining. Doesn't make them employees, doesn't necessarily pay them, but it's the first step. Hey, let's get around a table and talk about practice times and lengths. That's what they do with grad students. They're in a union in college campuses. They make what they make, and it's not much. But you do something like that, and then it graduates. Doesn't mean anybody else has to follow that model, but that's the next step. And I think they could wake up one day, Greg Sankey and or Tony Petitti, and say, we're going to take this revolutionary step and institute collective bargaining and or revenue sharing.
I think it's the only way to put a cap on costs and the Wild West that NIL has become. And it allows everyone, all the different athletic directors, to budget what they have, and they know what's coming, because this has got to be driving all of them crazy. Dennis, as the old game show host said, we're out of time. We're out of time. And they were taping 5 shows in a day and acting like can you come back tomorrow? Yeah, and the contestant would always say, sure, but you're not going to come back next week. It's going to be something else. Because we'll have another special guest then. Thanks very much for being here. You're always fun to talk to, a good friend, and you do great work, man. See his stuff on Twitter, Dennis Dodd. What's your Twitter handle?
At Dennis Dodd CBS.
Okay. Dennis, you're fabulous. We'll be back next week on the Blue White Breakdown.